Beautiful.
seconds. There is nobody watching, but that's okay.
That's fine.
Steve, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah.
It's just we two Matts this week. Matt McGibson, who's typically with us, has asked to take a leave of absence. He's been going through some stuff in his life, and so he's like,
Oh man.
yeah, well, life happens. So
Yeah. Well, we still got a Mattriachy here.
Yeah, we still are a two-match strong Mattriarchy today. What are you working on here?
I got a scene, a border crossing, where my main characters are going incognito through the border, trying to get through a Roman checkpoint, and they're having a discussion about what really motivates Romans, and they're kind of these two main characters, Axiel and Myra, right here, are showing their competing views on how they really judge the Roman Empire. They have like different views on what their problem is, and it also kind of shows what their I guess what their own worldview is,
And is this from the current story that just crowdfunded for?
This is for book 3. So we got there's 4 books. I'm about halfway through this book. I got book 2 in the bag. Book 1's at the printer. So.
And you began this as a web comic, right?
It was for a while, and then I was publishing it myself until about 2016, and then I went with a digital publisher, and so they just kind of handled it for me. And then with the understanding, like, I guess they were at the time this was Comic Digital. They're a great digital publisher, and they were putting out crowdfund, like Kickstarter campaigns, like once a year, and it got to a point where they I guess they were just kind of moving away from like doing that and just trying to do anthology kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so Kyrie wasn't going to get a print run, so I asked. The only way to do a print run was for me to go it alone and to break with them and to no longer publish it digitally. So I was willing to take that chance and go print only. So
wow, okay,
yeah, and I'm glad I did. It was for the best. But
so, what program are you using in here, right?
It's all Adobe Illustrator.
Okay. And is this a 2-page spread you're working on?
Yeah, I like to work 2 pages at a time so I can see how things mirror, I do the thumbnails 2 pages at a time. I draw them right next to each other, and then I try and do the whole layout situation 2 at a time. That's how you're going to see it, so because I'm always playing the physical being the best version.
The proportions look a little different to me than a regular comic page.
Yeah. You're very astute. So when I started this comic, oh man, I started this comic thinking, oh yeah, what's a page size? 8.5 by 11, right?
Yeah.
It turns out that's not the same as a comic, and so my book is like a couple inches shorter. It's just as wide, but a couple inches shorter than your average book, which actually I kind of like because you get like a broader, more like when you open the book, and you get the spread, you really see like a full it's like a more of a cinematic widescreen. Like this is me rationalizing it, right?
Well, no, that makes a lot of sense. One of our partners, Rico, he does his little comic. I shouldn't say little, but they're cute animals in prison. The Warehouse, and I've seen his stuff around it all. But his stuff is all different formatted, and he just picked a size and went with it based on his sketches. And they're actually based upon an even measurement in from a piece of graph paper, because that's how he lays his roughs out, or on graph paper.
Oh, well.
And then he takes and draws it out from there. And so that's the format size. And he just went with it. And when he went to print, he asked what print houses you work with, and I was like, "Well, dude, your pages are weird sized. I'm not sure if anyone's going to work with you or not, because it doesn't come that size. But here's who we go, and we really like working with them." And we went with was like, "Sure, we'll cut anything, man." So
that's great. Yeah. So, I mean, you pay for the full page, but if they got to cut it.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same. It doesn't cost any different, but they don't charge extra for cutting the tops and the bottoms off. So, I mean, it does look actually different on the shelf next to other comics. So it's got a different kind of a grab appeal.
Yes.
His style is different, so it looks a little more like a cartoon book. And he's got that cartoony style. And so it works really well, actually.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for especially in indie comics. Like, there's a proud tradition of finding little ways of just making yourself a little distinct, and a lot of times your weaknesses can become your strength if you understand them right. And something like a weird print size, it might keep you out of a couple small press publishers who just want to deal with the standard size, but I mean, it's all about like, you have an original idea, so why not have an original looking comic? I guess can't hurt, No,
I agree. I think that's a valid thing there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, man, this seat, it's still a little warm from the great Doug Ernst sitting in it.
I tell you what, there has been, thank you. There has been possibly one of the more surprising things that have bring back the Quaaludes we have in the chat. Easy Bake Coven has appeared. And
I got to bring up the chat.
I don't know if it's on the screen, actually. If you can look at the screen there, I just tab over, because
you serious?
One of the things that this allows me to do is I can highlight things and bring them up onto the screen for all the viewers to see.
I've been wondering how people do that. That's so awesome.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how it works in other programs. Here, I just click it and it shows up. See, here we have this one right there. Right, just on from StreamYard that they have right there. So.
Oh, fantastic! I just thought that was like some weird voodoo magic from like OBS or something.
Well, and it might be in OBS, but I'm not using OBS. I'm just using the native software that StreamYard uses, because I'm a little low tech. So.
No, yeah.
Yeah. So this thing is, but yeah, it has been. So I don't know what Easy Bake is talking about.
I'm probably zooming in and out too much. He's probably nauseous
from
that. Sorry, buddy. Yeah, I'm gonna try and not do that.
But yeah, but what I was saying before I got distracted was that it is one of the strangest and sort of most unique things that I have experienced, is getting to meet some people that have been willing to come on and talk about stuff. And
yeah, that's so cool.
Doug's a serious honor, and he's come back twice. Once to talk about his book, and once just to talk about Spider-Man and stuff. And so that was,
watching him tear up about Spider-Man was like kind of an all-time high right there. That's really awesome. He's a true believer, It's just
that's true. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The greatest video ever, Quaaludes. Is that a YouTube video there, Easy Bake? I'm gonna have to check that out, because I feel like I have yet to see the greatest video ever. So there we have that. So, but yeah, on topic though, other than sitting in the Ernst chair, I'm not going to keep calling it that, but I will today.
Yeah.
I had you on. I wanted to talk to you about a couple of things. And as you and I were talking in the backstage, and for you guys watching, we may be a little short tonight rather than doing the full 2 hours. I found out I have some personal errands that I've got to attend to before it gets too late tonight. So I didn't realize that was coming up, although I kind of should have seen it happen. This weekend in Fort Collins, Colorado, I'm going to be going to the Fort Collins Comic Con.
Awesome.
Down there. And there's some stuff that isn't ready that I didn't know.
Oh, no. Okay.
So,
that explains the tension.
Oh yeah. So that's part of what's going on there. But yeah. So there's a couple things we want to talk about. One was the purpose of history in fiction, and some feelings about that, because I know you write a lot of historical fiction, and I've been known to do some of that myself. I thought that'd be fun to talk about. And the other thing I wanted to go on about was talking about faith and bringing some religion, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We'll see if we can fit both of those in the first hour.
Yeah.
And if we can, then we'll wrap it there. And if we can't, we'll probably wrap it there too.
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, loyal viewer, but yeah, that's right now. So let me see here. 1 second though. So Matt. You write a historical fiction, right? We've talked a little bit about it, that there's elements of myth that are worked in there all throughout it. What was your motivation for taking this history and putting it in there?
Gosh, well, I grew up reading a lot of European comics. I had friends from Denmark growing up who were reading Asterix and Tintin, stuff like that, which was those were my first introductions to comics, really. And and what they read over there is they have every genre that we have in novels or film or television, but they also have it in comics. And I always thought, like, wow, like the medium, there's no such thing as a comic book genre over there. You know what I mean? Like over here, we do have that. And I guess that has something to do maybe with the how things kind of sort of collapsed in the 70s and all this. And then like the big two kind of successfully, kind of figuring out like a really large section of the industry and stuff like this. And it's all been interesting here, but for the rest of the world, Asia, Europe, I don't know, you just get every kind of genre. So I've always, especially like when crowdfunding really kicked off about 10 years ago, I was kind of watching Kickstarters more on the European front or the anthology section, where there's just like a really weird lot of variety of, people just kind of, okay, this is just a short form storytelling approach, or we're doing a long form multi-book approach, but it's it's a crime thriller or something, or it's like that just excites me. So I just picked my favorite genre that I like in other formats, which is just kind of like action, adventure, globe trekking, historical fantasy. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna try and do a comic with that, and I'm gonna do like a Western set in North Africa and see where I can go with that, because I feel like that's like something that appeals to me. It's something that I can be excited enough about to continue for years as a side hobby. Yeah, so that's kind of what happened, and that's what I've been doing since 2015, thereabouts, 2014, 2015.
So when you come to work out your story, and of course, since you're writing historical fiction, you're going to have a little bit of history and a little bit of not history, right? how where do you divide that line between going straight with a retelling and injecting fantastic elements?
Well, Indiana Jones has always been the golden rule for me, and so I always try to say like, okay, how did they balance it? You know, how did Spielberg and George balance it? And I think it needs to feel grounded in reality, but it needs to reach up in terms of what the MacGuffin is, in terms of uh, what you see at the very beginning of the story to set the boundaries of how fantastic things are going to go, and then what you see at the at the middle and the end of the story when there's the biggest tension and the climax and resolution. Like that needs to get supernatural. It needs to get into this world of you know lands and experiences that you can't that people don't normally get to see or experience. And beyond that, like it's just it's up to you. But that's kind of what I try to do. So I really like history itself. I like real history itself. So I like to try and rigorously research it as much as I can. These sort of worlds, try and figure out like how people actually dressed back then, how to what languages they spoke, what sort of towns were available, was the architecture look like, and then on top of that, I'll lay out like a fictional, like a what if sort of universe of this is the history that you didn't learn about in your textbooks, kind of thing.
So you you have, and I have to confess, I've not read Kyrie, so I don't know how much in the book, but from following your Twitter feed, right, you have dug really deep into that history, into what's going on there.
Yeah,
What spurred on you?
What spurred it on? Oh gosh. I'd say, I mean, Rome has always interested me. It's always interested a lot of people, of course. It's like the first, in a lot of ways, it's the first modern transnational empire and culture. Like it sets the stage more. Like I guess like culture leapt closer to what we have today than at least that's how I see it in terms of like what we traditionally define as the West. I guess it leapt closer to the modern era then than it had in times previous. And in a lot of senses, in periods after that, like way up until the Middle Ages or something. So I feel like you can use, and people often do, you can use Rome as kind of a sieve or a filter for talking about like how is culture doing today? How is it faring? Because you're always you can pick a period. This is something that people who get obsessed with history often fail to remember, that you can't really just pick something because you like it. You can't pick a period just because you like it. You gotta realize that you're speaking to an audience who lives in the exact same moment that you do. So you're gonna have to pick a period and then figure out how that period relates to you, how it relates to your audience, the sort of people that you're trying to speak to. So like Indiana Jones and Ancient Rome, I just think it kind of makes sense because it feels like you can play the Romans as the Nazis, or you can play the Romans as, I don't know, like America, or Western civilization generally, or you can play them. There's a lot of ways that you can play them that look familiar within the adventure kind of storytelling tropes, So, yeah.
Now, one of the things is that I think is really interesting about that is, like I say, I think you're right that Rome has a certain relevance, especially here in the West, not only because um, of, uh, of the importance of Rome to Christendom, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also because so much of our architectural style and everything was built to reflect Rome.
Mhm.
And part of that was because I think our founders here specifically and intentionally understood that nothing like what they were wanting to do with America had existed outside of that Roman context. It was an international coalition that was supposed to be built around this idea of the individual, of the idealized individual,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That was the Roman idea for their citizens. They, whether they were able to get around their concept of class enough to even accept that, that's a different discussion, right? But that definitely was part of their idea, and I think that's an interesting thing because I think America also went to try to go toward that goal, the idea of the ideal individual as the building block for the nation. And so I think that because of that, Rome existed as even though it took all of its highlights from Greece or from Persia or from Spain or whatever. I mean, Rome itself just absorbed the great things of the other places. In the same way, America does that. In a lot of it is.
Yeah, because they're really the first. I mean, Persia did it in some ways, but
That's true. That's true. I take that back. Persia does factor.
but it's the first Western, based on Western philosophy, Western pragmatist empire, I guess. Capitalist pragmatist empire. And if it works, they take it. And that's something that I think appeals to the American spirit in a lot of ways, for better or for worse. It worked out for Rome in good ways and it hurt Rome in other ways. It works for America too, and maybe sometimes hurts America in some ways too. But like that's kind of how that industrial, they're actually talking about it in the scene actually. Axial believes that Rome wants to constantly expand its empire because they're obsessed with gold, and he relates that to himself. He says, I like gold. Everyone likes gold. Um, Nothing to be ashamed about with that, but they chase it more than anyone else, and they rape the land of all peoples to possess her, including my people. Myra here, one of the main protagonists of Kyrie, she doesn't think it's gold. That's kind of like something that you would say about um, any empire, really. But she thinks it's iron, and she says that iron kind of reminds her of Rome in a lot of ways. She has an issue with Rome. She's got a chip on her shoulder about it. So she thinks, what does raw iron ore look like? It's ugly. It's not pretty like all the other metals. It's brittle. It doesn't shine very well, even when you stick it in a forge. But you can make some truly astonishing things with it. You can get a really sharp edge with it. You can build massive structures. You can create a new world out of iron. Something you can't do with copper or gold or shiny, softer metals just can't live up to it. It's counterintuitive, but iron is the future, and she kind of sees that in a way, I guess. So anyway, that's kind of how I like to play. That's see, you can see like it's fun to you take a period, you get to understand it, you develop a relationship with it, and then you find a way to translate the issues of that time. You get when there was a lot of unease and unrest about where Rome was going, if it was going to survive, does it deserve to survive? Which is a lot of the things that we say about today. And, there's a lot of Western unease. And you get to figure out ways to translate that into modern times. So, yeah. I hope every time you ask a question, by the way, I'm just going to talk until I get uncomfortable and I realize I may have actually missed your question. And then I'm just going to stop.
No, that's perfectly fine. So what was it about? Because I get the feeling that your love of history did not start with trying to make this comic, right? That's something that pre-existed. Was there a particular moment in time that just sort of sprung you forward into that, or?
Gosh, that's the hardest question. I've been trying to answer that for myself for a while. I think when I graduated school, I was really into sci-fi. Part of it is that I'm lazy and I'm not very creative compared to other artists, and I can't really think up fictional universes in the future the way sci-fi people can, or fantasy people. So part of it's I'll just read a book and then it'll tell me how it is. But another part was I don't know. I think I had an existential crisis after college, an undergrad, and I just I was thinking about going back to school for history. I'd never liked history before, and then I graduated and I just looked over the cliff into illustration world, and I was I don't like I don't like my future, so I think I'm going to dwell in the past for a bit. It was kind of an introspective period in life, and then I don't know. I think I just kind of gathered myself up, matured a bit, and in the meantime, I had been reading lots of books on history, and I guess this is me, I guess, paying homage to being thankful that I came out of that relatively sane, I suppose. And I did not go back to school for history, which would have been the hallmark of an insane person. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's true, but that's hilarious to think about.
Well,
Yeah.
if I was going to pay bills, I don't know. If I wasn't worried about bills, I'd be in a history program somewhere.
I can give you that. I can give you that. The things versus the desirous things.
Yeah.
So.
You get married and then, the bills start becoming more real. Just about roommates. Yeah.
That's a real truth, man. So. But yeah, no, I guess part of the thing I was thinking of that is I guess mostly when you hear about people that are really into history, right, there tends to be this long-term sort of passion that goes with that. That's just this ongoing part of their existence. And I know for myself, I've always been captivated by history, and I think part of that is growing up in my with my grandma. She was an educator.
Oh, cool.
Teacher, and so she just, that's just part of her experience is growing up in that context, and so I think that's part of it. But I think the other part of it too is that I think also growing up in the church, the way I did, where it's rooted. Christianity is rooted to a time and place. And so I grew up in the kind of the independent evangelical church. That's the unofficial branch off the Southern Baptist, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's a bunch of different little churches that aren't Baptist churches, but their doctrine's shockingly similar. They're not Baptists.
Yeah, we got those down here.
Yeah. And that was kind of where independent Bible churches, that where I grew up in that, and it was such a sola scriptura idea, that the idea of studying scripture and then understanding the history the scripture was written in became fundamental aspects of faith. And I was exposed to history and the breadth of history very early on, and it's something that just was captivating to me. I think a big part of my captivation is the story of it all, right? I love to see the stories as they lay out, and I've always loved storytelling. And so doing that, seeing that in how that plays out between the narrative of the Bible and the narrative of the history book was just something that captivated me. So seeing that, and the more I moved forward in history and looked at that even from an extra biblical perspective, and looked at that in every realm, looking at Shakespeare was interesting because of the history that was folded into it, and the history that surrounded the War of the Roses, and reading through that made reading the Black Era it was captivating for me. I was shocked to find out that Stevenson hated the Black Era. He thought it was his worst book. He was sorry he'd written it. I was like, it was really good. So
I really want to see a comic in War of the Roses period. I thought about doing that. I had there was like a couple years I was like obsessed with British royal history.
Yeah,
that would be amazing. It's actually, I guess picking up on your segue, about the same time that I was getting into history, I was getting into I was just kind of like basic. I became a Christian from basically nothing in high school, and then in college I had I was just kind of like basic vanilla evangelifish, Baptist, but I don't call myself Baptist.
right.
And then I had an Eastern Orthodox boss at my job where I was working on campus, and he's like painting icons and talking to me about Chrysostom and all this, and like just stuff I'd never exposed to, didn't have categories to deal with. So I had to delve into history in order to understand things more, in order to agree or disagree. And that got me, like, I ended up becoming more of a reformed persuasion. But the only way I could get there was by really understanding. I had to develop, I guess. I had to discover a reason for liking history, I guess, because some religions make historical claims, some don't so much. Christianity is making all kinds of historical claims, and I need to. Maybe in America, we've forgotten about that. I think people are more aware of it now, but at least in like the 90s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, maybe people were a little more like trying to adapt Christianity into like timeless truths that didn't really have any historical grounding. And when I was going through the history crisis, I was also going through I guess something of a crisis of faith, where I was like, what do I believe? Why do I believe it? Do I have grounds for believing it? The same way I have grounds for believing in the theory of gravity or something, or that sort of thing. I need to figure out what I've been told, like where do these things actually come from? So, and that develops a passion, especially from a redemptive historical perspective, where you're saying God is condescending to speak to his people in a way that is comprehensible to them, is kind of located in time for them and in a context that they can understand, but is actually applicable to future generations, if that kind of makes sense,
Oh, absolutely.
That's the same sort of thing we try to do with fiction in general. We take one time period, it's usually one that we made up, or maybe we take a fictionalized historical one, and then we just kind of say, how can I tell the story to my readership that they'll enjoy and appreciate and maybe be inspired by, but through language that both they can understand, that's timeless, but also is particular to the characters. So you're true to the characters the entire time. Nothing feels forced, which is what God does with us. That's what God's done in the past, I guess.
And I think that's one of the unique things.
Church, so. Yeah.
I think it's one of the unique things about the Christian experience in that particular context, because it fits in the place where history, like real history, and this is one of the things that, like, when people go on about or are very skeptical of the faith, why I can't see my way around that, because the reality of history aligns in such a way to get these messages spread, right? Like like one of my big like areas of personal study is I love the legends of the Celtic lands, right?
Yeah.
I've done I don't want to say a tremendous amount of research on that, but years, and I've been picking up with that. Part of and that's the other part of my love of history stems from. I love to see the machine of it all come together, but also my family story is an immigrant story, right?
Yeah.
My grandfather was the first generation from Wales, born in this country,
That's
and
so
so
cool.
the idea of the immigrant story is very personal to me. Um, and because that's just been part of my experience.
Mm.
And so, for me, there's never been a question that's been part of my history. So I love seeing that played out in other ways, in other shapes and forms. Um,
Mm.
uh, but those stories, right, those legends and the history behind the legends is largely obscured,
Mm.
right? The Celts, by and large, didn't have a widespread spoken language. They kept it very insular. They rapidly converted to Christianity, leaving many of their traditions behind. Not all of them, but many of them. And so, with that, there's just this kind of a hole where a tradition used to be,
Mm.
and it's not completely empty, but it's largely so. And it's one of those things that is um, the human society did not align to preserve those things in perfect completion, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And um, um, and that's the way it is for most cultures because the story of humanity is the story of conquest, right?
Mm. Mm.
And because of that, you have all of these things that just don't line up like you think they would, or that
Mm.
are just aren't coherent generation to generation.
Mm-hmm.
But in Christendom, you don't have that, right? That's quite the opposite picture of what we see happening. You very literally do see um, a society that there's preservation of knowledge across cultures and even idioms that exist across cultures in ways that shape the progression of and evolution of languages.
Hmm.
Um, their source within the presence of the written word of a particular people from the ancient past, and that's a rare, almost a bizarre thing when you think about world history, but that exists in such a way that preserves that within that particular faith tradition, and
Mm.
so that's one of the things that probably the probably part of my, in addition to my love of history, because of I love to see how it all fits together, the fact that it continually reinforces this picture of the world um, as it moves along generation to generation and people to people and archaeological discovery to archaeological discovery
Hmm.
is just fascinating
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I always some yeah. Let me just say yes. I'm just let me just I shouldn't continue if I don't have a fully formed thought. But yeah, really neat thoughts there. Yeah. Are you? Hey, I got a question. Are you a fan of the Ransom trilogy by Lewis?
I have not read it.
Oh man,
There's so much Lewis that I haven't read and should have, but I haven't. Read.
because he plays with the Welsh stories in detail in a way that you would probably find very satisfying
Well,
as a
goodness
Welshman.
sakes.
Yeah.
Suddenly, I'm totally intrigued. Um, yeah, my sister, I'm a big fan of Lawhead. I really appreciate his work. And it was much after I was introduced to Independent Cycle and have read several of his books that I discovered he's actually from Nebraska.
Oh, cool.
Well, he's from Nebraska. He doesn't live here anymore, but he's from Kearney. And about once a year, he comes back to visit. But I guess he lives in Oxford. Um, he moved up there in the '90s, and I guess he just stayed. But yeah, but he went to UNL and went out, moved to England to do research for the
Oh, wow.
and just stayed. So, but yeah, but he's done a lot with his Pendragon cycle it's a historical fantasy, I guess you'd call it.
Mm-hmm.
Elements of fantasy into a historical setting to reinterpret the Arthurian cycle as a historical novel instead of a romance. So it leans a little heavier on the Welsh stories, the pre-French stories, and does a lot with that. I really enjoyed them.
Well, that's the same. Lewis makes the Pendragon legends real too. That's what the ransom thing is. So
cool. I will have to check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
you could just read Out of the Silent. Honestly, the first two are great. They go together well, but the last one really does stand alone. I think honestly, it can stand alone. The others can just become prequels if you want to read them, and that's where the Arthurian stuff really shines forth. Is in that hideous strength. So it's just like we talked about Charles Williams last time. He wrote the Ransom trilogy as an ode to Williams because he was so impressed with his idea of taking Arthurian legends and Platonic ideals and other kind of weird, pre-modern themes and ideas, and the pre-modern worldview, having it crash into the modern worldview and see what happens. So he takes the he he takes the Pendragon legend and then turns it into reality and forces it into the modern world, and then sees what happens, sees what chaos ensues in a good way. So
yeah, no, I think that sounds really appealing.
Yeah,
joined the Star Storyteller in the chat and mentions Hood, which of course I don't know if you read Lawhead's Hood trilogy.
I saw the movie.
A little different. Lawhead's Hood stories, they take the Robin Hood legend and place them 100 years before Prince John, and to the time of the Marcher Wars in Wales, and they reinterpret the story in the context of the Norman invasion of Wales. So,
oh man,
yeah,
those Normans.
Well, I was talking to who was I chatting with the other day on Twitter. Somebody made I think it was Jack Irons was talking about how important forgiveness is, how grudges are temporary and friendship is more important.
Yeah,
very very good stuff. But I made a little snide comment. I said I don't know about grudges just being temporary. I still kind of hate the French from the Norman invasion.
I saw once. Did you know that the storming of Normandy? There's the British erected a monument to that moment in World War II, and it said it's just something about like, you guys invaded. I can't imagine them putting this up today. It's insane. You guys invaded us to conquer us. We invaded you to liberate you. Something.
I hadn't heard that. That's amazing.
Yeah. Could you imagine doing it's just so insane.
Yeah, no.
You're gonna save France and then you're gonna rub their nose in it at the same time.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole Vichy thing. I mean, at the risk of being that guy.
Yeah. I guess they kind of, yeah. Maybe
I got to admit, like the whole the Norman invasion of Britain is the Norman invasion of Britain is its own thing, and there's reasons that I take issue with it, and it's actually sort of a weird thing. So I'm really involved in our local Celtic society, right?
Oh, cool.
And there's several Scots, and that we all work together to put up our local festival, and I'm like the only Welshman on the board, right?
Yeah.
So when everybody is like, I get a lot of questions about, plans and things, and I know a lot about the general lore, but when people talk about Wales, they say, well, what do they have? Well, the fact is we don't have a clan structure like Ireland and not like Scotland, and those aren't the same either, but like the houses that rule over Wales were all taken down by the English.
Yeah.
Our lands were confiscated, our titles were taken,
Yeah.
that stuff. And so, it's a little bit of a sore subject.
Yeah.
Looking historically, I mean, I don't have any personal grudge over it. It's not like I'm a terrorist or anything, but our history was obscured because of the French incursion. That if you look at British history prior from 800, 900 to about 1100, well, or the late thousands, there came to be a relative peace between the English and the Britons. They settled up. They pretty much said, okay, we're not going to go past Alpha's Dyke. Okay, this is an agreement. Okay, we're pretty okay with this. And there was relative stability for a couple of generations between the various English kingdoms and the various Welsh kingdoms. They kind of stopped fighting. And then the French showed up. we're going to take, and so they had Harold was the first, you probably know this, but Harold Godwinson was the first high king of the Saxons, right, of the English.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And everyone like this, it's okay. So then his second cousin, once removed, who doesn't have any land or titles, only money because he's a bastard, he says, I'd like a little bit of land. Money is nice, but land is better. If I kill my cousin, I can take his land. So he does.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, all the sins of humanity are writ large in the history of English monarchy.
That's true. That's very true.
Yeah, like they have so many. That's what makes them so interesting. It's like you've got so many different dynasties with different motives, different origins. Like it's not. We just think, oh, it's the British crown. It's always been the same crown from the same place, from the same families, and no, it's changed hands several times, many times, for many reasons, and it's it's part of the beauty and the stain, I guess. That's just how history goes, I guess.
Oh, it is. I mean, it's that way with every place, everything too. I mean, that's just the fact of it. I mean, that's one of the my family records. We have pretty solid records until the mid 1600s back into Wales.
Oh.
Then a little murky, where I haven't been able to find the physical records to back up the family stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
The family stories take us all the way back to Rotary Mawr, the first High King of Wales, in the late 800s, right?
Oh, cool.
Right, but there's about 13 generations of uncertainty in there.
Yeah.
Right. So in the middle of it, just on the other side of that uncertainty, the purported family line is the House of Dunavar, which was the kings of South Wales.
Mm-hmm.
It's really not that unlikely because there were 9 noble houses in Wales, right? And anybody, and here's the crazy thing about that, anybody who any Welsh descended person who had family in Wales 400 years ago, right? As recent 300 or 400 years ago, is probably descended from one of those 9 houses because it was such a small land, right? And I mean, people married between things or whatever, but I mean, the chances are very likely that anybody who had family in Wales between 300 and 400 years ago was likely descended from the 9 houses, because that's just how it worked out between who survived and everything else.
Yeah.
And also because Welsh, the Welsh tracked their nobility differently than the English too. They didn't have primogeniture.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So yeah, I could get into that whole thing. I won't here, but anyway, so the thing about the House of Dunavar was called Dunavar because it was named after the castle that was built. It's been rebuilt a couple of times, but it was originally built, I want to say 1050s, right? But in I think the 1200s, there was a set of brothers, and one of them inherited the title, right? And he was the guy who got the castle as his home, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other brother contested this, and to contest it, he signed up with the English army, who was the Anglo-Norman army, right? And took the castle by force, right? Because this was the old time. Technically, it was part of Wales was part of Britain at that time, and the whole thing. Wales was subject to England at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all that kind of thing. So then, when the English forces left, right, the other brother came back to retake the castle, and rather than allow the superior force to take the castle, the second brother burnt it to the ground.
Yeah.
And so, you look at pictures right now. If you're to care to travel or check it on the internet, you can go to pictures of the Castle Dunavar today, and it's a very impressive pile of stones with several of the outer walls remaining and everything, but it's utterly uninhabitable. And that was what happened. It was brothers fighting over land, which sadly is a pattern in my family going back generations. So
yeah.
I mean,
It's the human
and not just that potential family. I mean, even more recent, it's been an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate. I'd almost say we've got some Welsh in our blood because that seems to be going on here, but it's very German, Anglo-German thing too.
Yeah, and I'll tell you though, the Gerald of Wales, Geraldus Cambrensius, in the 12th century wrote that the Welsh are extreme in all they do, such that you will never meet a good man better than a good Welshman, or a bad man worse.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So he was also a scion of the House of Dunavar on his mother's side as well, and he wrote he's one of the first during the Norman invasion of Ireland. After that, he was took a tour of Ireland and wrote down a lot about that. And he was a cleric and historian.
Oh, neat. Yeah.
Yeah, he had some very unfavorable things to say about the Irish and the Welsh both.
Yeah. Fashionable at the time, I suppose.
Oh yeah, that was part of it. That was part of it. Was the fashionability. I mean, he had favorable things to say, but unfavorable things to say.
Yeah.
Which backed up his assertion about the extremities of the Welsh. Himself was an extreme person. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we've got a lot of Irish ancestry, and I suppose it's similar in some ways to the Welsh in the sense of being kind of underdogs in the UK, and always kind of like a feeding ground for resources and men and material stuff like that for a more dominant power east, and suffering for many generations.
I think one of the very interesting things about the Irish history was that shortly after the Norman invasion, is how shortly after the Norman invasion was many of the families that came over actually adopted Gaelic lifestyle and culture, law.
Absorbed in,
yeah. Sure. And on my mother's family, there was actually a
oh, did we lose you?
connection for a second.
Oh, good. There we go.
But anyway, the on my mother's side, going back several generations, are the family Redmond, and they were one of those families that had become more Irish than the Irish was the term that was given.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, and they just absorbed Gaelic style, and so for many generations, these and the Fitzgeralds and the Redmonds and a few others that were actually Welsh Norman, many of them, and came over and adopted the Gaelic lifestyle, and that culture preserved up until, my goodness sakes, that culture preserved itself fairly intact up until the post-Elizabethan time and the Stuarts. And in that time, there was a big push to unify the cultures of the nations. And so the Prayer Book rebellions happened shortly after that, the first time, and a lot of kind of stuff that was meant to like knock down the high bits and fill in the low bits and create a unified English or British society. It's and so a lot of that, the resource mining and stuff, because that was directly before the Industrial Revolution. So a lot of that stuff is connected in a lot of ways. And that idea that these other cultures were somehow primitive because they're different or because they weren't just literate or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to look at that.
Spoke with a barbarian tongue.
Yes. Which one again we see history repeating itself in that way again and again. And that America is not immune from that either. You look at a lot of the ways that the Native American tribes were treated at different times. Have a lot of that same kind of stuff going on.
Yeah, which is always weird. Like, you think about, Anglo-Saxon pride. That's kind of you're proud about being immigrants yourself to a land that did not speak English, that spoke Welsh and various Gaelic and Celtic tongues. Different culture, more Roman, more Christian. They come over and then they they immigrate, they settle in, they assimilate, and then they're the new norm. And then the Vikings come in, they do the same thing, and they assimilate. And it's interesting. I guess that's kind of the American story too, in a way. There's always immigrant influxes that become that shift the perspective a bit, but become the new kind of.
I think that's one of the differences between America and every other nation on Earth, right? I'm including immigrant nations like Australia and Canada, right? Because America was specifically founded with an ideology, with a concept, with an idea, with a credo, right? That is not exclusive to any one culture. Now, one culture kind of birthed it, so to speak, right? One culture brought up the the idea of a lot of that stuff. English, to say it another way, English is the language of freedom, right? All of the philosophic work that went into becoming America happened in English. That wasn't a mistake, I don't think. The same way that, you know, the Romance languages are great languages of passion and poetry and that kind of
interesting. Yeah.
There's in English, all of the great works of freedom, excluding the Bible itself, were written in English, right? And I think I honestly think that there's several reasons for that. The idea of the Christianization of England, the individual nature of Celtic legend, and the noble ideas of Arthurian myth, and all of those things that existed within the cultural paradigm. I think mirror a lot of that kind of stuff.
It's kind of it's a world. It was a world on the edge of civilization for, as far as the Mediterranean world was concerned, until relatively recently, until the Normans invaded, basically. And you could almost tell. Like, I've thought about telling. I think it'd be neat to see a comic done in a kind of like a Heart of Darkness, like Temple of Doom sort of respectfully, not trashing the Welsh or something, but like going into the heart of the jungle of at the edge of known, off the maps into unknown territory, and it's England. It's or it's Britain, at least, which is how the Mediterranean would have seen a place that far off, like,
right. Oh, they did. They wrote about how terrifying it was. Those that made it back from the tin mines, they were like, "Oh, horrible! We all wear pants."
Yeah, they got weird mustaches, and they got the blue paint and the
Everybody's
it's fascinating. The farther back we know. No, you got.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely an aspect, the isolation of it. And so we have this not melting pot. We have this place where this furnace of ideas, where the ideas became American individualism, first had their beginnings. Then bring that over here amongst the what can only be considered some sort of this divine confluence of fortunes, where Jefferson and Adams and Madison and Washington and Franklin and George Mason, and I mean these guys, the smart people that have ever been at one place ever, right? I mean, not one of them was a monoglot. All of them were deeply read, profoundly educated, both by self and by other institutions. These guys were the smartest people to ever exist in one place, right? And they said, if we're gonna do this, let's do this, right? And they designed a nation that was built on the idea that everybody could be amazing. That's really what the Declaration of Independence says, right? That everybody can be that. And I mean, and even the bits from I don't know if you watch Razor Fist at all.
Yeah, I tune in for him.
He's got an amazing video on Cicero and on the educational scheme of Cicero, which was heavily, and I didn't realize this because I have not read Cicero, but it was a heavy building block that was used by Noah Webster and a lot of the founders who laid out the educational systems that were adopted later on by different schools before we had compulsory education, and so that. But anyway, the idea that the ideal individual is the ideal citizen, and when when
I love it.
when a person is perfectly independent,
Hmm.
they are ideally suited to become a member of society.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And that was the educational foundation that the founders said, yep, let's teach kids how to do this, right? And so, and so Webster and I'm going to forget his name, the lawyer who worked with Abigail Adams to found the first women's school. I can't remember, but anyway, and these guys they were Cicero bros, and so they said this is what we got to teach people, and I had not heard this, and I guess one of the reasons is that Cicero was taught in Latin in schools before 1920. But we don't teach Latin, right? I don't speak Latin. And so that's moved out of that thinking that was part of the American substrate, existed and continue to exist within the cultural idiom. And I think part of the reason superheroes developed here is because the superhero is the individualist story, right? That's, I don't want to get too much into that, but
yeah.
But that's that little seed of there. Every hero story is the story of a man, not the story of a system. So that's why every hero story is a right-wing story.
Yeah. I'd say I'll just quickly throw this in. I've heard every American story is a Gothic story too. It's always it's a story about liberation from the old, rotting, decaying, the old world with the monsters in the attic and the spiders in the closet, liberating the youthful, you know, preserving love, scooping it out to the new world, I guess, and having to burn down the old world if that's what it takes. But yeah, that's the Gothic, that's the skeletal structure of the Gothic genre, and that's the American story in a nutshell. So that's what our fiction usually looks like.
Yeah, that
and
sometimes
I like to think a lot of
you just described the Great Gatsby. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was saying you just described
and
the
a
Great
lot of
Gatsby.
Hemingway stuff. And
I've said for years the Great Gatsby is the great American novel. I didn't read it in high school, right? I didn't read it until I was older. It just wasn't something that came up for me because I was reading a lot of English books at the time. And somebody challenged me to read some American books, and so that sounded interesting. I've always loved jazz and stuff, so the jazz age has been a thing. So I was like, okay, I'll read The Great Gatsby. And before that, I had labored these ideas in my mind that someday I'd get around to writing the great American novel. And then I read The Great Gatsby, and I was like, oh, I guess that's not going to happen. And then I read
it's already written.
Then I read To Kill a Mockingbird immediately after, and I was like, well, that's not.
Yeah.
Got a purpose to live.
That's another Gothic story in a way too, but more hopeful in a way, I guess too. But
Well, yeah, I mean that's
because we're constantly trying to liberate ourselves and to individuate, I guess, if that's a word. Trying to establish ourselves as the self-sufficient individual, emerging from the collective background, I guess, which is beautiful. It's not something we can ever perfect, and every generation has to figure it out again. And the nice thing, like you said, is that it's transferable to that it's not race or gender specific or something, or language specific or anything like that.
Well, I think that's one of the things that it is, because it's transferableness is something that was discovered, right? I believe it's always existed that way, but that's something that was that was discovered as time went on. And so when you look at the writings of many of the church fathers and many of the Roman philosophers, there was a belief that this idea of the ideal, or the idea of those who could be redeemed or could be participatory, was limited by capacities. And so one of the big conflicts between St. Patrick and the other saints that he wrote about was that people didn't believe that the Irish could be saved.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Like a sub race. That's what you have to do.
There were certain barbarian classes that just don't worry about it.
They're more animal than man. Yeah.
They've earned their destruction, let them live in it, And it's like,
same with the Irish.
Yeah. And so that was one of the things that there were people that, and even much to his shame, that was one of the positions, not for salvation, but in terms of living free. Abraham Lincoln didn't believe the former slaves had the capacity to live free. He just didn't think they should be owned by anyone. The idea that they could become Americans fully and completely was foreign to him before the Civil War. And during the Civil War, and upon meeting slaves who had enlisted voluntarily and seeing this, and meeting with Frederick Douglass and becoming friends with him, that he changed his perspective, because he realized these guys are exceptional. These guys, maybe they're better men than me, And so that's one of those things that I think that we discover the capacity of humans to rise beyond our station, or I should say beyond our nature. And this is one of the things that I've said, back on the religious tack, being made in God's image means that mankind's proper station is freedom, right? But our natural state is slavery.
Yeah.
We are slaves to our passions. We are slaves to our greed. We are slaves in almost every conceivable way. But we were designed and we were made to be these free, roaming, these glorious and illuminated beings. But we can't be, right? And it is in our brokenness and in our fallenness that God had condescended to elevate us through His own sacrifice. And I think that's one of the philosophically glorious things. And again, talking about how history has reaffirmed my belief in Scripture, but the metaphysical concepts in Scripture that are there just seem patently to line up with everything we've discovered about moral and governmental law, in the last 400 years. All these remarkable discoveries and in the metaphysics of political theory that just, they are exactly what you expect if the Bible is true. While the Bible speaks into a world where slavery was normal and where women were property, it speaks beyond that to something that, these things are still valuable, and these things are not, maybe they are what they are, but they are not proper in what they are. There's a world beyond that. And that's exactly what we've discovered in philosophy, and exactly what we've discovered in history. Yeah. And that's why, for me also, I get a little up on my hind legs when people talk about, people try to spout off that Jesus was a socialist. And I'm just like, everything Jesus taught presumes private property ownership. If you don't own your goods and yourself, you can't follow anything that Jesus said.
Yeah.
It even goes back into the Old Testament, because the Ten Commandments presume private property too.
Yeah. Well, you only deserve to own it if it's if the state deems it good for you to own it, right? So
don't get me started on that. That's nonsense.
No. Do you listen to there's this guy Victor Davis Hanson?
I've heard him a couple times.
Yeah, he shows up here and there. I like his take on slavery in America, or just in the West, the modern West to begin with, is slavery was more insidious and harder to eradicate when it was based on just based on fate and luck, you know? Like, oh, well, you ran into some debt problems. Looks like you're a slave now, or I happen to conquer you, or circumstantial issues like that. But in after you know the Renaissance into the Enlightenment, when when people started to try to find scientific classifications for why someone should be a slave beyond the uh, circumstantial issues, and they started forming issues of race theory and stuff like this. That's when it became easier to knock down, because it was clear. You meet men like Frederick Douglass and women like Sojourner Truth and stuff like this, and you'd see like, well, self-evidently these people may look different from Europeans, but that doesn't make them any less capable. Like they don't earn it by their whatever we're calling race, as we're inventing these categories in the early modern era. Like these people don't deserve it by virtue of that. We've already abolished this idea that people deserve it based on luck or chance. So that made it more easy to topple, which was interesting. So it was a worse. It's a stupider idea to base slavery based on the skin color that you were born with, but that made it more ridiculous, so it was easier to push over, which is kind of interesting, especially in a Western. I keep saying Western, I don't know. I don't know what that means anymore, but it's especially it was in a Judeo-Christian context where people were saying, well, every man is born equally in the image of God, and there were these Christian abolitionists speaking up very loudly for generations and generations, and a lot of them are Christian Africans saying, look at me, look at look at your brothers and look at me, like, am I not your brother? And your brother's keeper. That sort of contextualization that helped dismantle. So making slavery more ridiculous, and making it and then having that ridiculousness being underscored within a religious framework where people in order to be faithful to their religious framework, they had to acknowledge that slave and slave owner are both equally valued before God. So why are we treating one like property and one like a property owner?
The real tragedy about that, and this will probably be the last thing I'll say today, because notice how late it got.
You got to go. Yeah.
And, but one of the most interesting things about that is that the founders understood that, right? That their founding was inconsistent with their principles. The slavery was inconsistent with the principles, and it was written into the law, into the Constitution, that the international slave trade had a deadline, had a run-out date, like 1820, right? So it was like 40 years after the Constitution, or it was like 40 minutes 35 or something like that. But after the Constitution took effect, there was a deadline date where the slave trade became illegal, foreign slave trade. To the day it was stopped, like it was a deal, because like slaves that were coming in through New Orleans and stuff, that was followed, right? But it was another 40 years before they really ended it. One of the things that just it boggles me that we hung on as a nation, and most of my family wasn't even in the country then, right? But
yeah, same here.
On to that structure, and we couldn't bring any foreigners in as slaves. We just kept making our own, right?
Oh,
And we
interesting.
for another 40 years to get out of what everybody acknowledged needed to stop.
Yeah.
And that is actually why a big part of why I think the Civil War happened from a cosmic sense, right? From a cosmic sense, because it's I think it was Jefferson that said, "I tremble for my nation when I remember that God is just and that His patience does not last forever."
Oh my goodness.
Right? and it was Ben Franklin that said, it is clear that God takes an interest in the affairs of men, right? And these guys knew what they were dealing with. I mean, the Declaration of Independence ends with an appeal to the Creator of the universe that if our cause is unjust, we place our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honors, all that. And
Yes.
and it's one of those things where I think that 700,000 Americans perished because of the Civil War. And that number was bigger than every military conflict that America was involved in from that time until about 5 years ago. Right? Almost 750,000 people were killed in the Civil War.
Yeah. And the country was like a tenth the size that it is now, population wise.
Yeah. Like that was, I think, a sixth of the American population.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's horrible.
Yeah. But I honestly believe that was the cost of the blood of those 40 years of our refusal to allow our African brethren to be free.
I'm sitting down now. I'm standing up.
Yeah.
You preach it. It's beautiful.
And the other thing on that, and the other side note of it is, it wasn't just the blood, but in order to stop the Civil War, the Sherman's March to the Sea, which I'm sure you're aware of, that was a Hiroshima and Nagasaki level of damage by comparison, right?
Yeah.
It destroyed virtually the entire material wealth of the South.
Yeah.
Fire. And so if you ever hear people go on about how America was built on slavery, that was all burnt away.
Yeah. Well, I've never heard it said that way.
Yeah. It was debilitating to the fact in the same way that that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were to Japan. It was utterly to cut the legs out from the rebels.
Yeah.
Because they were, many of them were so vested in it, they would have fought to the last man, and that was the calculus that was done in the same way that it was done with the Japanese after Okinawa, not Okinawa.
Yeah.
Well, it is Okinawa. After Okinawa, the Americans were just like, if we don't do something, they're going to kill everybody. and so the idea was 2 cities of people versus an entire nation. Who do we want to kill?
Yeah.
And so that was the thing there. And it was the same thing with Sherman's March to the Sea. It went along the back end of it, and because the South was also getting money from France at the time. But they just said, that's it. We have to stop it, or everyone dies.
Yeah. Sherman, as my understanding of Sherman, Victor Davis Hanson talks about him a lot too. It's kind of one of those maverick genius generals that people hated to need, I guess. People wanted to win the war by conventional means, and it didn't look like it was going to be done very well, if at all, by the Union side. And it took a man like Sherman to to burn the South to the ground, to end it quickly, and no one thought he could do it. But yeah, I guess it was either that or it was my understanding. His appeal was it's either that or it's going to take a lot more boys and a lot more years to end this, and likely at that point they were going to settle on a truce and a breaking up of the Union, I guess. So yeah, it's what a horrible time in our history. But it turned out at least the Republicans won, right? So we have that to thank. The slaves were freed. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. We can talk about the Ku Klux Klan later.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So that's a whole different thing. But no, it is a horrible thing. But like I said, I really do believe that is the cost of our indifference to what we knew to be true. Right? We're a nation built upon the principles of the Bible and the very best thinkers the world had ever seen. And like, it was one of those things where the governmental philosophy of Rome and the moral philosophy of Scripture, and what would the confluence between these ideas created this nation where freedom can be a real thing, and instead of living up to the potential, we said, well, we now have also built a machine to make everyone we want to be rich. So let's just go ahead and keep pumping that. Coincidentally,
speaking of getting rich, you need to get to a comic convention, don't you?
I do. I doubt I will be rich from that, but I hope to sell a few books.
Yeah.
I got to get going. I should have done that half hour ago, but that's that.
No.
And I
Thanks
will
for being generous with your time
later. And thank you so much for coming on, Matt. I know we only loosely discussed our topics. Well, the history was fun.
Oh yeah. So yeah, happy to come on anytime.
We'll have to.
Let me know.
I really do want to spend some time digging into the faith question.
Yeah.
Or at some point, I was really hoping that because I knew you fell toward the Reformed, and and everything. And I'm actually still sort of in the
cage stage.
What?
No, you don't know that terminology yet? I won't introduce it to you.
I haven't heard you.
Okay, don't worry about it. you want to eclipse? Is that?
I got what you said.
I said a cage stage. Is that?
No, I have not heard that term.
That's when we got to put you in a cage because you're a danger to yourself and others. takes a year or so to cool off, usually. So. Yeah, we'll talk about that next time. So you're in the process of kind of working through those things?
No, not at all.
Okay. That's fine too. Sure. That's fine too. If you think it's all stupid, that's fine.
No, not that either.
Okay.
I'm having a hard time kind of defining it. The rules of doctrine I find that I most agree with are the Calvary Chapel. As by Chuck Smith. But I don't attend Calvary Chapel. I actually go to Berean Church, which very much falls into that Baptist, but we're not Baptist line of thinking with that.
Sure.
But at the same time, I have a lot of respect for many different denominational perspectives, I've really appreciated listening to a lot of apologetics from several Reformed guys, and so I appreciate a lot of that worldview. But I guess one of the reasons that I really fall in line with the Calvary Chapel perspective is that when people go on about predestination versus free will, I I think that's a silly argument. Because the answer is obviously yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
it's
even Calvin taught yes. So it's kind of a modern false. It's like a YouTuber apologetics false distinction.
yeah.
Binary.
Well, people get really heated about that.
Yeah.
And and the other thing is questions of gifts of the Spirit, and that kind of stuff. I just think that Calvary Chapels, not necessarily everyone, because each of them is sort of a thing, but within the fellowship, I think that falls. It explains a lot of the conflicts that people have. A lot of people assume their conflicts are conflicts when they're really just, you're dealing with life as a four-dimensional being inside of a larger dimensionality. So the things that you think are conflicts within Scripture that you're trying to explain this way or this way, they're not really conflicts because our God is eternal and pan-dimensional. So,
I love it.
yeah. So,
hey, speaking all the deep thoughts today, I can't. The only problem is that you say too many interesting things. Has anyone ever told you that? I bet your wife tells you that all the time.
that's not exactly what I hear from the wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's turned 4, so they're not necessarily always interesting the 7th or 8th.
Yeah. Yeah, have me on again sometime whenever you want, and we'll figure something out.
Maybe, like I said, I was really hoping to have that Matt would feel up for coming on because we're Catholic. So.
Oh, neat. Okay.
So I thought having the transition through the ages sort of a thing would be really fun to take a look at that from. I have a lot of respect for a lot of Catholic thinkers. I just disagree with a couple of significant points.
Yeah. Same. We'd probably be.
So
but as respecters of history, as students of history, we understand that these topics aren't simple. They are complex, and there's been various views from all parties throughout history, and you gotta wade through that if you're gonna understand.
I will say one last. This will be the last thing.
Yeah, I know. I keep feeding you.
So I know. So one of the significant things that I have an issue with, and this is a little outside of everything, my opinion on this, but the idea of transubstantiation of the host, right? I believe that the big O Orthodox reading of that misses on something because that they believe it becomes the literal body and blood of Christ, and as well as Lutherans, I believe, right?
Yes, yeah.
I think it misses something because I think it divorces the language from its Jewish context, right? Because every time I've talked to a Catholic or an Orthodox about it, they one of the arguments they bring up is that if you look at the Greek, it specifically talks about these are literal terms it uses. And I was like, well, one, if it's a metaphor, and you don't use literal terms, you rob the metaphor of its power. So that's a factor. But beyond that, you got to understand why it's such a big deal eating with people and breaking bread with people, because from a Middle Eastern context, if you eat the same food as them, your body and their body are nourished by the same food. It's the same body. So Jesus eating with prostitutes was an issue to the Jewish religious elite because he was becoming one with them physically.
That is a genuinely novel interpretation that I've never heard before, but I'm 100% open to hearing you out on it.
So that was the context of just eating food. So Jesus set up this meal, this Seder dinner, right?
Yeah.
And he says to his disciples who are with him, this is my body. And it's already part of their context, right? What nourishes me nourishes you. Here, this bread that I'm eating, you're eating, right? Already Seder dinner, they're already gathered together on here. But he doesn't finish the Seder, right? It's 4 cups. He leaves after the 3rd cup. And that 4th cup is left undrank.
Yeah.
I have a suspicion. It's not a belief, right? Because it's a wild idea, but I have the suspicion that when we partake of the host, it doesn't become Christ; it becomes that Seder meal, right? And so we partake of Christ in the same way his disciples did at that meal, where it's part of that same Seder dinner, and it's part of that Passover, and he is the lamb, right? He's the Passover lamb, but he's the Passover lamb to us the same way he was the Passover lamb to them, because it's part of that same Passover celebration, that same Pasch that's going on then continues at our fellowships around the world to this day. And so at the marriage feast of the Lamb, we'll have that fourth cup and it will be complete. And that's my opinion on the subject. Because he said
the fourth cup's the one blessing, right? I think.
Right. And he said, I'm not going to drink of the wine or eat of the bread until I drink it new with you, with my Father in paradise. That's what he said when he come back from the dead. So I believe that's what it's talking about. And so I think that the big O Orthodoxes are missing their Jewish perspective on it. And I think that the Prots are so I think that the Prots are so obsessed with not being Orthodox, they also are missing the context of this. And it's something that is mystic, is both metaphor and mystic, is both metaphor and reality, is being missed by people because they're not understanding that it's the same dinner. Now, I've heard a lot of preachers, I've heard several preachers say, talk about it being the same meal because of that, especially those who have studied the Seder dinner. But I've never heard anybody think about it in terms of that it's mystically the same dinner, that it's not just metaphorically the same dinner. Because I think I think the mystic is a real part of our life in the same way that we transcended consciousness. I think that's still a real part of us.
Yeah. I'd go with that. I think a lot of like my vague understanding is, okay, you nailed Lutherans, especially Lutherans today, but Luther said a lot of interesting things. A lot of the early reformers tried to wrestle with like more of a mystical interpretation, ranging from like it's merely an in remembrance kind of dedicatory, kind of show that you do, to it's actually the body and blood, to more of a mystical sort of thing. I think I would say the Presbyterian view, which is where I come from, goes probably more in the mystical way. And if there's more of a Jewish argument for it, that'd be something that I would appeal to Presbyterians and to me. So I like what you're thinking with that. Yeah. Definitely. Because even in the first few centuries, as things got more and more Hellenized, I think people kind of lost, like we're talking about, like this whole the gospel successfully translates, because truth is always imminently translatable into different cultures and languages. Falsehood can't be translated, but it always gets stuck in particular language and culture, and it gets frozen, but truth constantly shifts to, it can be re-expressed in new and appealing and interesting ways all the time. And that's kind of what happened when Christianity got Hellenized, but it lost a lot of the context, maybe, for what some of the details on what's going on with how to actually think of the Lord's Supper, I guess, the way the Lord himself thought of it.
Well, and I think one of the things that is very insidious, and I actually this falls into one of those things where I haven't really heard it taught, but I haven't ever spoken with anyone who had a good argument against it. But I think Revelation actually, Christ in the letters to the epistles warned about the dilution of the gospel away from a Jewish context, the dangers of replacement theology. And maybe I'm maybe reading that a little into the text there, but One of the really interesting things when Christ said that he was going to say the things that were and the things that are and the things that are to come, I have this suspicion that the letters to the churches can be interpreted all three ways. Talking about the literal history of the places that they reference, talking about a pattern toward the end times, but I think there is also a pattern in history relating to those churches and the names of the places that were selected.
Oh, now you're going. Your Catholic friend will like that. That's very Augustine's. It's like threefold nature of the. Yeah.
And the threefold nature of things also factors into my obsession with the Celtic legend as well.
Oh yeah.
The land, the sea, and the sky are the realms of creation in the Celtic worldview as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, the tripartite nature of life and all kinds of stuff. It's a whole different thing. You are the Catholic friend we were talking about, Matt. You showed up in the chat.
Oh,
and Carl got here. So everybody, this was last week too. Everybody showed up just before we left.
Yeah, we're saying all nice things.
Yeah, so the funny thing about if you take the literal translations of the names of the cities of the churches that are mentioned in Revelation, in the order they appear, it's actually a map of church history.
You mean up to that point, or the past 2,000 years?
Past 2,000 years.
Okay, you're gonna have to. That might be for another time. You may have to work a little harder to tell me on that.
I'll bring out my notes sometimes.
Yeah, that could be. I'm okay with that. I just tend to think, oh yeah, it's Turkey. There were a lot of churches over there.
Yeah,
issues, but
there were a lot, and it's once again. I mean, I think Chuck Missler may have also made mention of that too. But
interesting.
I'm not the only one to notice something like that. And no, Matt, we do not get armadillos up here. Our winters are too cold.
Plenty down here.
Oh yeah. I used to live in Oklahoma, and they'd be all over the place there. But
are you serious? Oh man, I didn't know they migrated that much.
Oh yeah.
Oh gosh, they're everywhere. Didn't they come from Mexico or something? It's like,
I mean, they live in Mexico, but I think I don't know where they're from originally.
I don't think they're from here.
But
those immigrants. Sorry.
Well, that was a little tacky.
Yeah, no. Armadillos are welcome. I just accidentally hit them every once in a while. And for that, I'm ashamed.
But yeah, so like I said, the one of the things that, like I said, the things that are and that were and that are to come.
Yeah.
That tripartite idea of it, and you can do a very if my presumption is correct, you can actually do a tripart interpretation of the 7 letters, and they actually line up very interestingly with the history of the church. But yeah.
Okay, which one's Philadelphia?
I think the next to last one's Philadelphia.
Okay. Is that us? Is that America?
I actually, well, I'm getting that all here because I'd be going off my memory. But Philadelphia, the real city of Philadelphia, I mean the historical one in Turkey, was one of the last bastions of Christendom in the middle of Turkey, and was a republic. It was governed as a republic, as a Christian republic, before it fell during the taking of Istanbul in that time period.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, there is some very interesting history with that.
Yeah.
There are some weird parallels.
Yeah. What?
Yeah. But
that'll be a chat for another time. I want to hear more about that. That sounds. I'm intrigued. I'm always interested in hearing new ideas. So
yeah, it's definitely there's some meat there. Some of it's conjecture. I wouldn't want to say that's a point of separation. Just like my weird, potentially heterodox opinion of communion. I don't think that's a salvation issue, but I do think there's a reflection in that.
yeah. You're just I'm just glad you're still yeah. So long as you're doing it, as long as you got the do this in remembrance of me part. I think there's some people that don't do that, and I think they're or however they view it. The fact that they're not following that part is kind of silly, in my opinion. But so long as you're doing it, I think you're on the right track.
I've met some people that don't partake because they are so concerned with the that section Paul writes about those that have done it without severity, right? I think is one of the translations.
Oh, sure.
And yes, Star, Revelation is supposed to be a mystery, she says here. And that's true, but to the Greek concept, a mystery is something that is revealed, that is hidden and then revealed. And it's a dramatic term in the theater. Something that is concealed and then revealed is a mystery. And the term apocalypse actually refers to that. So the revealing. That's why in English we translate it as the revealing or the revelation. So it is something that is hidden and then exposed. So not necessarily I have exposed it today, but and Matt replies, the real mystery is why armadillos are so cool. That's obvious because they are an armored mammal. Same reason rhinos are cool.
Yeah. Okay. That's pretty freaking awesome. Yeah.
It's a battle possum.
Yeah. If we ever bring back like extinct animals, like, dinosaurs are cool and all. I grew up on Jurassic Park like the next guy, but if we could bring back those gigantic, like 2-ton armadillos that used to roam around here, like the mega fauna, giant sloths and all that, I'd be totally down for that. Keep them in zoos, please. I don't want to hit a giant armadillo on my way to work, but those things were the boss. And even Africa didn't have those. We had the coolest stuff here.
It's something to be said for that.
Yeah. That's my 2 cents.
Good place to end. Also, the Star says no Republican rhinos. No, we don't want that.
Wait. I don't know what that means. But
Republican in name only.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Oh, I didn't even know about that. Yeah, that thing. Yeah. Yeah, bring all that back. Come on. T-Rexes are cool, but like, have you seen a mastodon? Like, people used to live around those things. They used to be here.
You know what the craziest thing about that is? I have to call it a night, but
yeah.
They have found semi-stable mastodon DNA, right, in samples.
Yeah.
And it is totally in the realm of possibility to use an elephant to grow a mastodon. That's not even a big stretch.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying it's a good idea. It's a game.
That is one good thing about Jurassic Park. One of the many good things is that it's a good warning about, why are we going to bring them back? To monetize them, to do scientific tests on them, to turn them into park attractions. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for coming on.
Yep.
Thanks for tuning in. I know it's the 4th time I've said that. I know. I have bad self-control when I get to talking about stuff.
Same here. I keep goading you on. It's
That's why I do a talk show, because I'm excellent at talking.
yeah.
All of your friends. I'm still getting next week set up. I don't know who it's going to be for sure. So I'm hoping another Matt, Matt Johnson from Omaha, will be coming in to do talking about. Actually, we might talk politics, because I've been watching politics for a while. He's also a pretty big righty, but I don't think he's quite as right as I actually am. And nobody really knows. I don't think any of you guys really know exactly how far right I lean.
Oh.
So I might talk about that.
Yeah. No rhinos.
No rhinos. Actually, yeah. I may even discuss my complex relationship with the GOP.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
I'll tune in for that. That sounds interesting.
Hey, Star says she's interested in coming. Well, we'll have to do that, Star.
Yeah, bring Star in. She's cool. I've heard her talk on Chester Busby on his channel once or twice.
Really? That is impressive on Chester.
Yeah.
Now
I forget what he was talking about. You know
This is a hot take right there. I don't know if you can see the screen.
Oh my gosh.
You and me are gonna have a conversation about that next week. Because little teaser, McCarthy wasn't wrong, but it wasn't his credit.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a great way to end it. You gotta get going. That's something to
Good night.
on.